may sit down. God bless you, and God bless Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning I have the honor of introducing the next speaker to you, Ms. Joyce, the Senior Vice President of IREX. She has had an illustrious career spanning over 17 years, working on some groundbreaking programs with IREX. Madam, can you come to the podium?
Thank you very much, Kabo. And of course, the most groundbreaking is the Young African Leaders Initiative. And I want to congratulate you all again. It's very nice to see you all. There is a lot of energy. There was so much energy last night when I was speaking with all of you that I couldn't help but think this maybe could be the new green energy if we could harness all the energy of the Mandela Fellows. It's exciting to hear from you what it's been like over the last 9 months since you returned home. I know you've had so much progress in your businesses, in your community organizations, working with other young people, and it's very exciting for us to hear. And as you know, this conference over the next few days is really dedicated to you. You drove the agenda. It's about conversations that you want to have, the networks that you want to build, and we're really happy to be working with you on it. There are a number of individuals I would like to thank in helping put this event together. First, the members of the Regional Advisory Board. So could they all stand for a moment? Kabo. Thank you all very, very much for all the hard work that you put into not only this event, but really supporting the program for all of the fellows from Southern Africa. Thank you very much. I also want to thank our colleagues from USAID who have been supporting, again, not only this event, but the internship program and the mentorship program and the other work we've been doing with you over the last 9 months on the continent. Could our colleagues from USAID all just raise their hand? And I encourage you to take time to meet with them. And specifically, I want to point out Aletta Musfoto, who I think most of you know, but who is the Regional Young African Leaders Initiative Coordinator for USAID, based here in South Africa, but working with all the fellows in Southern Africa, and also working on the regional leadership centers, which you'll hear more about in a couple of days. I want to give a shout out specifically to Paul Galatis. Where's Paul? Yay, Paul. Paul did all of the design work for this conference. So the books, the agenda, the posters, the wall, and you know he did all the design work for the Presidential Symposium in August. So he's come to be one of our favorite designers, and we are very glad to be working with him, and he's done a wonderful job for this project. And if you read on the last page of the agenda book, he talks a little bit about the inspiration for the design for this conference. As a global nonprofit and non-governmental organization that really has a primary focus on investing in human capital all over the world, I can say that being a partner to the U.S. government on the Young African Leaders Initiative has been a tremendous honor for us. And really, it's amazing for us to be engaged with all of you, the talent, the energy. I often tell people that when I finish speaking with a young African leader, I say, wow, I'm not really sure what I've been doing myself because they have achieved and are achieving so much every single day. And you are an inspiration to everybody that you work with. And I will say that I have, since you've gone home, I've spoken to so many Americans who met you all across the United States. Staff in our congressional offices, people in our community-based organizations, people in our communities and schools, businesses, and everyone tells me that these are the most amazing people they have ever met, and how much you sharing your dreams, your hopes, your inspirations, your challenges, how much you informed them and shaped their view of Africa, and how important that is for us, for our relations bilaterally with each of your countries. So I really thank you for being the amazing ambassadors that you have been and that you continue to be. As you know, you're the trailblazers. You're the first 500 Mandela Washington Fellows. The next 500 are preparing right now. They're having their pre-departure orientations even this week. They are getting ready to go. They're going to be looking to you, especially before they go and when they come back, to help bridge the path for them, because you are the trailblazers. And the good news is next year, we're going to be recruiting 1,000. So that's an amazing, you are a force as a group, and you are building a brand for yourselves under this program, and you are so much the pioneers of that brand. Over the next couple of days, we also, because you're the brand and the pioneers, we're also the pilot, right? So this first year, we did a lot to support you. I spoke to a number of folks last night who got to speak at a conference they might not have gotten to speak at if we didn't have a way to get them there, or they had an internship, or they had a mentorship. And we want to hear more from you about what other types of support is really important to you, especially when you're transitioning back in that first year. So we want to hear, so really between us and our colleagues at USAID and the State Department and the IREX staff, there's so many people that we want to hear from. And I would like to take a moment to thank the IREX staff and the Africa Lead staff. Can they all raise their hands, who've been working with you all on this over the last several months and on this event, for all the work that they've done. I want to also make a plug. You still have time. There were a few folks who said, I really still want to get a mentor, or I really still want to get an internship, but I didn't apply yet. You know, through the state alumni website, you can still apply. You still have a few months to apply and access some of those services, so I want to encourage you to do so. But one of the last things I just want to say was that I really believe that President Obama had a special vision for this initiative, and you all got to hear from him, and you got to hear from the First Lady. But one of the things I think that's very unique about this program, and when I talk to people about it, is I said, you know, the investment is not only in you as individuals, but as you as a group. The investment to keep you connected, to support you together, is because I believe that there is a belief that the sum of your talents, the sum of your collaboration, and the sum of all your work across your sectors is really greater even than the individual parts. You are a force as a group as much as you are as an individual. So I want to really congratulate all of you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Cheryl Anderson. Cheryl is the mission director for Southern Africa for the regional mission. She has a long and distinguished career as a diplomat in the U.S. Foreign Service. She served in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. She served in Uganda and Sudan, in East Africa at the regional mission, and in Ghana. So she has a lot of deep experience working across Africa, and we're really glad to have her here this morning.
First Lady of the Republic of Namibia, Your Excellency Monica Geingos, Washington Mandela Fellows, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm honored to represent the U.S. government here today with such a diverse group of accomplished leaders. I think you're in for an exciting and hopefully challenging and probably inspiring, very inspiring 3 days. I've heard wonderful things about the work that many of you do for your communities, for your countries, for your continent and beyond. From Comoros to Angola to our host South Africa, you're dreaming big, and you're making your dreams a reality, and you're reaching out to others and improving lives all over the continent. That's what true leaders do. I really am honored to be in your company. You continue to inspire me, and you inspire all my colleagues in the U.S. government. And we find ourselves always intrigued and looking forward to hearing what your next steps will be. At the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, our mission on behalf of the American people is to end extreme poverty. and to help build resilient, democratic societies. In Southern Africa, that means we invest in projects that address HIV and AIDS, food security, trade, investment, economic growth, the environment, and education. But we know we can't achieve these goals on our own. And that's where you come in. Local partnerships are our basis for achieving development impact around the world. And we see you as our partners, some of our newest partners. In fact, we're counting on your continued commitment to help us achieve our shared development goals in the region. And I'm happy to tell you that some of our YALI partners have already become very important USAID partners. One is Marlon Parker. Marlon was one of the early YALI partners who went to Washington before the Washington Mandela Fellow program was established. Marlon Parker established our labs in Cape Town, and that's an organization that has reached more than 50,000 young and very disadvantaged South Africans with IT and entrepreneurship and leadership training to be able to reach their potential, and in many cases start their own businesses. Our labs now operates in 23 countries, including a branch in Botswana, operated by another of your YALI counterparts. I'd also like to mention that in addition to the Washington Mandela Fellowships, we're also very excited about launching the upcoming regional leadership centers. One will be in Pretoria, one in Nairobi, one in Accra, and one in Dakar. And these will help expand access to high-quality leadership development opportunities now for thousands more young people across Africa. And there will be a robust online component. So these centers will give the fellows an excellent opportunity to continue their professional development after returning home. And these regional leadership centers will leverage your experiences, providing you with another opportunity to give back to your communities and to support and influence the next generation of African leaders. Being a good leader isn't easy in whatever you do. Doing the right thing means that you almost have to have an endless supply of energy, dedication, and resourcefulness. So I thank you for choosing this path and creating the future you wish to see for Africa and the world. Consider USAID your partner, your supporter, and one of your loudest cheerleaders. We know that you're already doing amazing work, and we know that we'll be seeing lots more from you in the coming years. Good luck. Thank you very much. And now I would like to hand over and ask you to welcome Uhuru Moiloa, who's the Deputy Speaker of the Gauteng Provincial Legislature. Let's give him a hand.
The Minister of Education in Gauteng is on a mission to, to digitalize the classroom of the future in South Africa. So he has instructed us not to use, paper. And I'm one of those that has got qualifications as a BPC. Now, a BPC is somebody who was born before computers. So you'll excuse me as I try to fiddle with the technology that defines you as young leaders of the African continent. And I can tell you that I'm having it very difficult here. But there we are. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, there it comes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. My name is Uhuru Mua. Now, rest assured, the gentleman who's arriving in my country later this afternoon is a president. I'm not a president. President Uhuru Kenyatta. I'm Uhuru Mua. And because I was not able to give my credentials to Russell, who hijacked me last night, because the minister, well, the member of the Executive Council for Economic Development in Gauteng couldn't make it for this conference, and he had agreed, but because of the tight schedule, I guess he was not able to make it. So I happened to have interacted with the Washington Fellows when they came back from the United States after a course that we went to do, I think, late last year. So more or less I have a sense of what you guys are. So when I got hijacked, I said, well, much better to be hijacked by people that you know than being hijacked by people that you don't know. Yeah, so I did agree that I would come and stand here on behalf of the MEC of Economic Development from Gauteng Province, and of course do what the people of South Africa has bestowed upon me as a responsible citizen and a public representative to always abide when citizens so requires that we avail ourselves to undertake certain tasks. So that's why I'm here. I'm uneducated. I'm not educated, so even if I gave you the information about myself, you would not have received anything impressive about my CV because I'm not educated. But I can tell you that I'm the product of the education system that was initiated by the late Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, and many other leaders in the African continent, in the diaspora, W.D. Du Bois, Martin Luther King Jr., and many leaders that have inspired our generation when we grew up as young people in South Africa. Of course, we grew up in a very dark part of South Africa, so we never had an opportunity, really, to interact with the world the manner in which the young leaders of today are being given an opportunity to interact with the world, if not to understand how the world is actually functioning. So I'm very grateful to have been given this opportunity with that background that I have. And if I had time, I was going to share with you, in short, my CV, because I didn't forward it, so I can talk about myself. It's much better, actually, if you talk about yourself than somebody talking about you. I was born in a ghetto. My father got a bit irritated by the behavior of boys, you know, in an urban township. Every time when somebody reaches the school-going age, he would take a decision that we are not going to grow up in the urban area because obviously we're going to be thugs and so on. So I grew up in a rural area of South Africa that had no electricity, no running water, no sanitation. That deficit still exists in my village. I think there was only one school in that village, and it had classes up to standard 6. So for us in that village to pass standard 6, which is grade 5, I think, it was the greatest achievement, because thereafter you have to either go to the mines, look for a job, and if you are fortunate, your parents had head of cattle, they'll sell 2 or 3 to take you to a boarding school. Now, a boarding school was such an achievement for somebody to go to during our time. And of course, there would have been very few amongst us who succeeded to go to school. I probably was one of those. Yeah, and when I thought that I was getting educated, started asking questions that could not be explained by any normal South African, I got arrested at the age of 17 and tortured. And I guess that was the beginning of a journey that I had taken as an individual, but also as a youth and a generation that now defines the democratic South Africa. And we're now able really to tell the story of who we are and where we come from, and what is it that has kept us resilient against the system that was meant to dehumanize human beings. So when I look at these products of YALI and the opportunity that is being given to you guys, I think one can only say that there is hope that the future generations will lead the kind of the wealth and political systems that would define the best that human beings can become in terms of civilization. But yeah, well, 56 years down the line, here I am. I'm now a deputy speaker in the Legislature, and I've interacted with the best leaders that the world, South Africa, can offer. And I suspect that I'm one of those people who can be called leaders that can tell a story of what it takes to be a young person who is resilient enough to resist temptations of dehumanization, focus and identify areas in your life that you think can make you become a better person. So I'm honored, ladies and gentlemen, to be invited to share this morning with yourselves. So that was my brief CV. It's long, eh? Your Excellency, First Lady of Namibia, the land of the brave, Monica Geingos, USAID Mission Director for Southern Africa, Cheryl Anderson, Senior Vice President and Chief of Staff of IREX, Joyce, Southern African Regional Advisory Board members, or rather a member and Mandela Washington Fellow, Kabo Diamond Moseki, Southern African Regional Advisory Board Chairperson, and Mandela Washington Fellow Christopher Lespo, the Program Director and all protocol that is here present. It is my singular honor and privilege to have this opportunity of welcoming you to our beautiful province of Gauteng, in particular to the Mandela Washington Fellowship Southern Africa Regional Conference. I wish to extend warm and word of welcome to you on behalf of the people of our province, Gauteng, and certainly our country in particular. It is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the public representatives of Gauteng province, and indeed the South Africa as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past few weeks, and I think this is important that we talk about it, we observed senseless attacks meted against our fellow African brothers and sisters, including those foreign nationals coming from outside the African continent who have found home in our country. These atrocious deeds were carried out by some amongst us who saw it fit to declare that Africa belongs to anybody else but Africans themselves. However, in a true spirit of Ubuntu to all humanity, we saw a much stronger and unequivocal stance by many peace-loving people of South Africa and Africans in the diaspora who stood up and declared that such will not be done in their name. And we must congratulate the South African government, which also came out clear and more determined in its condemnation of these acts of xenophobia, and has henceforth put in place numerous interventions that are expected from the state, and that declare itself as a democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and internationalist state that respects, first and foremost, the right of human beings to have a free movement. It is our collective intention to ensure that we do not have these harrowing experiences again in our province or in our country. But we must also add that the gathering such as this one that we have here of a Young African Leaders Initiative, an initiative by President Barack Obama, pursuing the dream of Nelson Mandela, the icon, and reflecting more on exactly what the challenges of the African continent are, that makes young people of our continent to descend their home countries often travel 5, 6 and cross about 6, 7 boundaries or borders of their home countries to seek a better life elsewhere in the continent and in the world. In recent times, we've observed very gifted young people of our continent voluntarily excavating themselves from the continent and contributing almost their entire selves to life of the Atlantic Ocean. These young people take risks to cross the Atlantic Ocean in pursuit of a better life for themselves. And it becomes so very sad that often when we reflect on the reasons that make young people of our continent to move from their mother countries to settle elsewhere, it is as a consequence of lack of leadership by some amongst us who have been privileged to take responsibility to lead the people of Africa and perhaps indeed the world. We must therefore reflect on the reasons that makes these young people to cross 5 boundaries through the bushes of Africa, risk their lives in the wild that is occupied by lions, hyenas, wild dogs, and everything else that can make a movement of human beings very vulnerable to attack. Yet, they have this human ingenuity to want to travel to seek a better life elsewhere in the motherland. So the African leaders must reflect much more deeper in their consciences as to whether they are leading the people of Africa with respect, dignity, human rights, justice, love, and whether in fact the economic systems that we have as the African continent are giving these young people an opportunity to grow as individuals, as collectives, as citizens, so that when human beings want to travel from one point to the other in the African continent or between the African continent and other regions of Earth, it must not be because they are looking for a better life. It must be because of just human ingenuity of interacting with Mother Earth as it is being created by the Almighty to be occupied by all human beings. To that extent, we challenge the African leaders to reflect much more deeper in their consciences as to what are the reasons that makes young people of our continent not to settle in their mother countries. So when we address xenophobia, we must probe it much more deeper, so that the African leaders must take responsibility actually for what is happening. We must condemn xenophobia, racism, ethnicity, and any other negative elements that makes human beings not to remain human beings in the first place. It is our collective intention to ensure that we do not relive this harrowing experience ever and ever again. This August occasion takes place in this city of Ekurhuleni, the east of Gauteng, which is home to one of our illustrious freedom fighters of the time, Dr. Oliver Reginald Tambo. Mr. Oliver Tambo, along with many from his generation of leaders across the breadth of our beautiful continent, served our people with distinction. This is the golden generation to which he belonged to, fought tirelessly and spared no effort to ensure that Africa claims a rightful place among the world's family of nations. A country, a movement, a people that does not value its youth, does not deserve its future. This is one inclusive and persuasive remark ascribed, at least, to Dr. Oliver Tambo. Viewed in the current context, in his own words, Mr. Tambo sought to capture the centrality of the youth voice in finding solutions, new and enterprising ideas on how to successfully claim the 21st century as indeed the African century. Thus, it is not a coincidence that you, as Mandela Washington Fellows, gather here in Gauteng, in South Africa, this year to discuss all issues, leadership, the challenges confronting the SADC region, the African continent, a new South African and a new African that must interact with the world differently from the generation of Oliver Tambo, with one common purpose, and that purpose is to liberate the people of Africa from the yoke of inequality, the economy that does not address the needs of many, but at the same time making a contribution to the United Nations of humanity. Because it is only when human beings have interacted in a way that creates conditions for human beings to recognize themselves, first and foremost as human beings, that all the challenges and problems that are engulfing humanity today can be addressed. And we can put a chapter behind us of human beings that thinks of bombs, of tanks, of guns, and all of these things that we use to settle our differences if we do develop some, such as those. Thus, it is not a coincidence that you, as a Mandela Washington Fellows, gather here in the shores of our country to reflect on what is it that you must do as young leaders in politics, in business, in commerce, and everywhere else. What is it that you can practically do to ensure that you contribute to the African continent and the world that finally will respect humanity as humanity, and that those of us who are privileged to occupy offices of authority must do so with a clear conscience that we are servants. We are nothing else but the servant leaders of our people. I say this because despite the prophets of doom who are loyal disciples of a narrative which condemns Africa to internal failure, refuse to understand that the story of Africa is that of an awakening giant. The winter of despair is briskly becoming the summer of plenteous prosperity, joy, and friendship among our people. The ascendancy to the leadership of the most powerful economy in the globe by an African in the diaspora, or rather a descendant, a very recent descendant of an African, thus give a sense that if we can put together our minds, we will be able, as we have been some years, not so many years ago, representative of the civilized or the most civilized sections of the global population. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll agree with me that when Africa was an economy of note, just less than 2,000 years ago, when it made sense to hide God's only child as a refugee elsewhere in the world so that humanity can have the pleasure of having God's chosen child, not only just to come and lead and provide answers to difficult questions of human civilization of the time. Africa was the home chosen by the Almighty to keep Jesus Christ as a refugee. He got educated here. He got educated here. So Jesus got educated in Africa. He achieved the highest standard of education in divinity. He studied philosophy. He studied leadership. And at the age of 12, he was given a task to go and test himself if he would be able to dispense the knowledge that so far he had acquired from his great-grandfathers in the African continent. So he left, went back, and he shocked the intellectuals of the time, the academics of the time, when he gave them a lecture at that age on the great books that the academics and lecturers of the time had not interacted with, or at least comprehended the deep sense of what the philosophy, religion, studies in divinity of the time actually provided. And then it disappears for quite a long time. So Jesus is absent, not in Jerusalem, not only in Jerusalem, he's also absent in the entire region of Canaan. He goes back to school, graduate. Once his grandparents from the kingdom of Sheba are satisfied that he is now ready to lead, they release him to go back home as an educated, sharp philosopher who was able to define and explain complex socio-economic conditions of the time. So off he went to his homeland. Yeah? And his last stop, he, of course, because he was a gifted, chosen son of God, does the miracles of waking up that man who was 4 days dead. And this is the man who was sent as an advance party to go and check if, when Jesus and his disciples lands in Jerusalem, he will be able to fulfill the mission of his grandfathers and the education that he has acquired from the African continent. And this man is dead, and he's the only one who has got the information. So it's almost like a CIA. You know the CIA, right? And the intelligence officers say to him, Jesus, you will not be able to come out of Jerusalem alive. And he says that my elders have instructed me to lead you to Jerusalem. So tomorrow morning, after sunrise, we are walking into Jerusalem. And when he arrives there, he finds an economic system that does not take forward the interests of the people as a whole. Levels of inequality so huge. The powerful are oppressing the weak, and the meek are sleeping in the streets homeless. His kingdom, the kingdom of his grandfather, has been converted into shambles, and the church has lost its meaning, and government is corrupt. Everything else is completely disjunctured. And this sounds like the Africa that you and I are living in, isn't it? So you need to be visited by Jesus. Because he comes there, and this is the only time when the Son of God unleashes violence against the system that otherwise could not have been toppled through peaceful means. And then the beginning of a journey of persecution of the Son of God. Now, this is the choice that the young African leaders need to make about your continent. Because we must not flatter each other before the world. We must be able to say that the young leaders of the African continent must rebel against the system that creates inequality amongst ourselves. We have to take a stand against that. In countries where there's no democracy, you have to fight not with weapons, but with your brains and argument that the continent has to find a reawakening. We need a new form of leadership that can convert the continent that is endowed with so many resources, and yet millions of their people are poor. This is the challenge that confronts young leaders of today. Nelson Mandela has lived his time. Martin Luther King Jr. came to the United States, lived, talked, died. There was an apartheid system. It came, it governed. It created a legacy that you and I are now concerned to transform. It has passed. We cannot blame apartheid any longer, nor blame colonialism forever. We must look at ourselves. What is it that we are doing now? Because the future is not the future of Nelson Mandela, the icon who has lived at this part of the world and passed. The challenge is for you to determine your own future as a young African leader. So we must thank President Barack Obama and the Washington Fellows for creating this platform. Ladies and gentlemen, in this era of endless opportunities, you are called upon to assume your rightful position as servant leaders who will place the development interests of your people at the pinnacle of your priority. You are called upon to pursue without sparing an ounce of effort a people-centered and driven development agenda which with the passage of time will return to our people their deserved humanity and dignity. At this moment, we need to ponder on what impact our young men and women as servant leaders are doing to regenerate the African continent, as summoned by the founding leader of the African National Congress of South Africa, Dr. Pixley Kaisa Kaseme. This is an African continent which would come to be, he said, and it would mean that a new and unique civilization will soon be added to the world. And that civilization is a civilization of humanity, of Ubuntu. Program Director, this conference should interrogate the role of the Mandela Washington Fellows in ensuring that, amongst others, Africa's Agenda 2063 becomes a success, and this in their capacities as citizens of their different countries. Now, I don't know how many of us have already interacted with the Agenda 2063 of the African continent. If you have not, please begin to do so. Just Google African Agenda 2063, and you will find a statement of commitment signed off by more than 56 heads of state that gathered in Addis Ababa in April the 15th, 16th, 17th, and committed themselves to an African continent that must unite by 2063, which will be the centenary celebration of the founding of the Organization of African Unity. It is indeed clear that we should rise to the clarion call of Africa's Agenda 2063 to recommit ourselves to the enduring Pan-African vision of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, driven by its own citizens and representing a dynamic force in the global arena. An Africa that is a partner to developed parts of the globe. In doing so, we'll be making strides towards the realization of a dream of all Africans in the continent and across the diaspora. As Kwame Nkrumah, the erstwhile giant of Africa, would have said, this dream is almost, in others, enunciated as follows. We all want a united Africa, united not only in a concept of what unity connotes, but united in our common desire to move forward together in dealing with all the problems that can best be solved only on a continental basis. So if I was to ask these young leaders whether they are conscious about this task, I would have asked the question, did you sing the African Union anthem when you started this conference? And if you have not, then it means that you've got a task to do with yourselves first before you want to change the environment outside of this conference room. And this is the task that is facing young leaders of the African continent, of the globe today. Let this conference be that pivotal moment which signals a new dawn in the clearer understanding of what ought to be the role of younger generations of Africans in taking our continent forward. In order to achieve all that, now when elderly people speak, must give them water. We're done. We're done. Thank you. In order to achieve all that I've spoken about this morning, we require a revival of conscience by identifying the root cause of our problems and sharing the understanding that the things that unite us far outweigh those that divide us. Once again, let me take this opportunity to thank you for inviting us to address you in this conference, this important conference, and wish you a very fruitful deliberations. And that deliberations must, among others, come up with a concrete program of action, not as individuals, yes, as individuals pursuing your own professional being, but as a collective on what is it that you are going to do as young African leaders upon whom the entire African continent and its future rest. What is it that you are going to do to ensure that you become part of this movement that has been started by President Barack Obama and the Nelson Mandela Foundation to ensure that the young people of this continent begins to take a responsibility not only to lead politically, but to take difficult tasks of transforming the economy of this continent. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Please welcome Mandela Washington Fellow and Chair of the Southern Africa Regional Advisory Board, Christopher Lesper, to the podium.
Distinguished guests, fellow African leaders, good morning. It is usually said that behind every successful man, there's a powerful woman. Today is my pleasure to introduce you to a successful and very powerful woman. Amongst her number of successes and achievements, she was managing director of Stimulus Private Equity. She previously worked as an investment banker. She is also the chairperson of several boards. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mrs. Monica Geingos, First Lady of Republic of Namibia. Thank you.
Please sit down. I was so happy when Uhuru did the protocol because I'm going to stand on the protocol established by him. Cheryl, if I looked confused when you were calling me this morning, it's because I'm not used to being called Your Excellency. So I continued walking, and then I realized she's talking to me. So good morning, Cheryl. I'd like to congratulate USAID and IREX for what they've managed to do with this Young Africa Leadership Program. It's absolutely essential. But if I'm insensitive to the title of a young African leader, please forgive me. At the age of 24, I sat on the board of one of the most powerful parastatals in the country. At the age of 27, I became the managing director of Stimulus and a shareholder of Stimulus, which has become the most powerful private equity fund in the country. The reason I could do that is because Namibia, like many countries, has got a significant skill shortage. And what that means for many young Africans is that you're exposed to opportunities that in other countries you would probably not have given your age. So I'd like you to sometimes, and the characterization of young can often lead to self-limiting beliefs. I'm a black female leader, I'm an African leader, I'm a young African leader. So these things sometimes, they create a mindset that if I don't get a certain position, maybe it's because I'm black, maybe it's because I'm female, maybe it's because I'm young. So I often reject these type of titles because having grown up as a black child, I suffered from what I call the triple jeopardy of being a black child. So when you're naughty at home, you get beaten at the scene of the crime. So if the scene of the crime is at a neighbor's house or a friend of your parents, they give you a beating. Then what they normally do is they send you home. And inevitably, you've got an aunt or an uncle or a grandmother at the home. She hears of your transgressions, she gives you another beating. The minute your mother or father walks into the room, your grandmother explains how you scandalize the family name, and lo and behold, the third beating of the day for the same crime. Now, these are things that we get used to. But one thing I'm not used to is the premium that we often live with for just being an African, for just being a Namibian. There's an economic premium. The economic premium being there are matters, there are macroeconomic issues outside of your control that really make you poorer every single year because your currency usually depreciates against stronger currencies. So just by coming from the country that you come from, you become poorer because everything becomes expensive from an import perspective. So there's a citizenship premium for what you do, and I feel it all the time in some of the companies that import products. And what we're seeing more and more is a sensitivity to price. But there's nothing we can do but to pass this price on to our consumers because it's not cost that we control. But what are the consumers saying is that the economy cannot sustain these constant price increases. So you have this constant challenge. So that's from an economic perspective, but it also happens from a personal perspective. Because I've often read many stories of young African leaders, and I'm thinking this is actually relevant from a global perspective. But because the story is couched as an African story, it's as if we don't understand the lesson that it has for us. I hope I don't offend anybody by using Mandela as an example of this, because Mandela is this wonderful example of what you do to a former enemy. You forgive, you reconcile, you move on. And he became an icon for that. The world loved him. But when the very countries who tout his reputation as a reconciler, as a peacemaker, when they are faced with conflict, what do? Do they forgive? Do they reconcile? Or do they fight? So often we take people and we make them icons. And we tell their African story, but we don't understand the global relevance of what they've done, nor do we apply it. There are numerous books and speakers who focus on leadership, and there's some of these principles that are really, they're universal. But coming from the context many of us come from, and that's why I did a TEDx talk on what is called wounded leadership. You listen to stories like Uhuru's. At 17, you get tortured. There are people alive right now in leadership positions on this continent who have witnessed and have been the recipients of untold brutality, and they are leaders. Now, there's physical wounds, and I'm sure Uhuru has them, and we can see them normally, but there's also emotional wounds, and those you cannot see. And those are the things that end up destroying our countries. Those are the things that you cannot see in leaders that compromises the decisions that they make. Because often leaders are good at leading other people, but they're not so good leading themselves. If you look at the state of our homes, of our societies, and you look at the things we do and say when we are up on these podiums, there's a disconnect. There is a hypocrisy. And until we start talking about these softer issues, I don't think these leadership principles that we read in books are really useful because we're not applying them to ourselves. Wounded leadership is a topic all on its own. The topic of leadership in the 21st century is an entirely different topic as well. But I often see people talking about leadership in the 21st century without talking about people in the 21st century. Society has changed. I was recently called into what I can probably call a meeting by my children. 4 of them. 2 are mine, the others I've raised. And these children had a list of grievances of all the things I do wrong. You don't listen. You don't consult. You just decide. And once you are right, you are right. And they had a list of grievances. And while I internalized some of their complaints and I could see the validity of what they were saying, I had to reject it and to tell them, you need to understand, in life, there is always somebody above you. There is always somebody prettier, thinner, richer, or more powerful than what you are. So it's not about me changing who I am as your mother, because actually you need me more than I need you. But I'm not going to change to suit you. You need to figure out how you are going to adapt and make me behave in the way you want me to behave. And that is leadership. Because often we are led and we are managed by our subordinates. I am led and managed by my subordinates all the time. I only realize it after the fact. And when it comes to society, like my children, we've got a less hierarchical society today as it was 50 years ago. I never questioned my parents. My children question me every day. So I cannot assume that the challenges to my authority by my children will be dissimilar to the challenges I face from people within organizations that I manage and lead. So often, you create a brand and leadership titles, but it's very important not to let that define you, not to allow that to become who you are. It's nice being First Lady, but it's a title. It's a temporary title. I gave a bit of a lecture to a young girl who told me, I want to be a First Lady. So I asked her, well, what happened in order for me to become First Lady? You got married. I was like, why are you aspiring to marry a president as opposed to aspiring to become a president? So often you need to deconstruct titles. And I much prefer my title as Managing Director of Stimulus or Chairman of eBank than a title of First Lady, because you want to define what is your role. What is it that you do? What is your purpose? What is it, what justifies and defends your existence? Being First Lady is temporary. Being a professional is actually permanent. Nobody can take that away from me. So you need to decide what is it about you that nobody can take away, and not to rely on temporary issues like titles, like status, like positions. As a leader and as a lesson that I'd like to give to many of you is, unfortunately, you need to learn how to say no. People will take up all of the time you have to give. So often, I've become an expert in saying no. I've actually got templates, decline letters, no letters, whether it's to lunches, to dinners, to family events, to professional engagements. I've learned to say no, because you end up doing more for others than what you have to do for yourself. It's not being selfish. You need to mentor, you need to give back, but you cannot do it to the detriment of what you're trying to achieve. Another lesson that I've learned and that I'd like to share with you is that now more than ever, we live in a society that it builds as efficiently as it breaks. I remember the story about 2 years ago. I think it was a South African-born marketing executive who lived in America. And before she got on a flight to Cape Town, she tweeted something illogical about HIV and Africans. By the time she landed, she was fired. Now, I do believe it was a mistake. But we live in an unforgiving world, and a single mistake can define you. We live in a world with cell phones, with pictures, with cameras, with voice recorders. So everything you do, everything you say, can very easily become a matter of public record. Whether it's a conversation you have in the privacy of your home, where you share unflattering views of a different ethnicity, of an individual you don't like. Whatever you say, you must always assume, how would this look on the front page of the national newspaper? So you need to be more conscious now, in this era in which we live, than ever before. I had some exceptionally dodgy views when I was in university. And I'm so grateful there wasn't Facebook or Twitter when I was in university, because I can guarantee you I would have tweeted those views. And I can guarantee you, you would have gone to unearth those tweets and say, wow, this is what the First Lady of Namibia said. So, and I see a lot of young people doing that. And I wonder, when you tweet, is it consistent with where you want to be in 10 years' time? Is it going to work for or against you in 10 years' time? The things you put on Facebook, the things you put on social media, the things you tell your friends, is it things that can be used against you? So you need to be strategic. You need to be, thank you, you need to be strategic about where you want to go in life, and you have to do everything else. I got a government-funded loan to finance my education. I made a decision, I'm going to pay it back, and I was the laughing stock of all my peers. None of them had any intention, have never paid the loans that they got to finance their education. But I knew I was going to become successful when I left university. And I knew if I don't pay my fees, I will be the one the media will one day castigate. So you need to have a very clear direction in your mind. And you need to behave consistently with what you want to achieve. So we've talked about digital footprint. I'm not reading a speech. I find it very difficult. While we're talking about digital footprint and being careful of what you leave out there, you must also be careful of leaving nothing. It's true. Often we try and Google you. And if I find nothing on the internet about you, I will wonder, what has this person been doing? Not even an opinion piece on a topic. What have you been doing? You've never been covered by the media. You've never put anything on Facebook. You've never put anything on Twitter. This counts against you. So even if it means writing unsolicited letters to random newspapers hoping they get published, you need to be on Google. If I Google you right now, what am I going to find? It better not be nothing. Then I want to talk about the schizophrenic relationship almost that most of us have as leaders. Because when I stand here and I speak to you, I stand here dressed in a certain way and I can speak to you in a certain way. I can operate in a relatively sophisticated environment. But as an African, I also need to learn how to operate in an unsophisticated environment. I need to be able to talk in a community setup, in a rural setup, in a way that I'm understood by those I'm speaking to. I need to dress differently, I need to act differently. When I'm around my father, I act differently. And I don't want to use the example, but I'm quite happy calling Cheryl by her first name. Let me try do that in a rural area to a friend of my mother, and I will meet a very painful end. But I've got no qualms, because I do understand I operate in two different worlds. And we need to embrace that. I don't think we should ever be ashamed of where we come from and how we operate where we come from. But we also need to know how to operate in a different environment, in a way that you continue to be relevant. So be schizophrenic. Have two personalities, because there are two worlds that we are all living in. We often make personal sacrifices to be where we are. I've got a suspicion that this program probably has more female leaders than male. Our country has a gender-based violence problem. Passion killings, assaults, all kinds of abuse. And I think it's typical from a country that's experienced as much pain as some of our countries have experienced. But I think there's something else happening there. I think there's a power play and a power shift happening in our societies that is manifesting itself in violence against women, because the roles are changing. And often, people assert themselves through violence. Whether it's poor communities who aren't heard and who riot and strike in a violent manner, or it's a husband who beats his wife because she doesn't behave, because she doesn't know who the head of the household is. So many of us have paid a personal sacrifice in order to be where we are. Maybe we were too young to understand these challenges, but often there's relationships that crumble. There are children who don't get the attention they should get. There are family members who don't get access. There are friends who you don't see. There is a personal sacrifice to be made. I think this illusion of balance is just that. It's an illusion. I think sometimes I'm a wonderful mother, and at other times I'm a wonderful businesswoman. But I'm never wonderful at both of those tasks at the same time. Then I want to talk about the relationship between money and power. They're very uncomfortable bedfellows, because the one normally seeks the other. What is the point of having a lot of money if you have no power? So very quickly, rich people start trying to translate that wealth into power. They start cozying up to politicians. They start trying to be politicians. And the opposite is also true. What is the point of having all this power and you're poor? So politicians start trying to monetize their power into wealth. And that is where corruption starts. So the relationship between money and power really is one that, if not managed well, destroys countries. And it's a difficult relationship, because the one inevitably leads to the other. And how do you manage that? We face that challenge now. I think as First Lady, the question I always get asked is, how are you going to make sure that your business interests don't conflict with your existing role? What my husband and I have decided is we're going to do declarations. It's not required of me, it's not required of him, but we will declare all of our assets. And in that way, people can know what you own, where it is. I don't want to hide through proxies. And they can see where the wealth that you have has been created, and not have to suspect you each time you buy expensive things that you stole it from the people. So declaration of assets, transparency, and communication are key issues in leadership. It's a double-edged sword. I don't necessarily want everybody to know what I own and how much it's worth, but I guess there's a bigger price to leadership at times. But it also comes down to a personal discomfort. Many of you are doing wonderful things for your countries. Many of you are highly qualified, highly experienced, and I'm sure many of you have wonderful footprints, digital footprints in your media. You get covered. But you haven't monetized that brand. So you've got this wonderful profile, but you're not making money from it. And that shouldn't be your focus either. There's one putting up his hand. And at times, you do what you love, and you become wealthy from it. But then there are days where it makes a hypocrite out of you. I remember one day I had wanted to go into a township, and without realizing it, I changed cars. I took my son's car. And I got in the car and I realized, you know, it's a bit stupid, look at this handbag. And you're going to a poor community, so I changed handbags. And then I thought about it as I was trying, why am I trying to hide what I have? So there is a constant discomfort when you see at how the opportunities you have relative to how other people live. And if you look at it from a global perspective, inequality is global. Actually, it's biblical, according to Uhuru. But it's a problem where the resources are sufficient. It's the way we distribute it that isn't. So we need to find a better way to distribute resources. We need to find a better way to include everybody in the community, because you need to look at a society, a country's citizens as a group. A group is supposed to protect, people protect the group. You act in a protective way to allow the group to survive. Now, if there are people in that group who don't benefit from it, who are not protected by it, they actually benefit from chaos. That is exactly what they'll do. And then this trend, where if people act in an inhumane way, we want to call them savages, but we allow them to live in inhumane conditions. But when they react in inhumane ways, we judge them for that. It's as much... So that is as much our responsibility as it is theirs. If I have no interest in that group, I don't care for its peace and stability, because that peace and stability doesn't translate into a better life for me. So we must be more inclusive. The word tribalism I don't like, for a very petty reason. The petty reason being, I never hear, you know, you find conflict in Eastern Europe, which is actually tribalistic, but it's characterized as religious conflict. Tribalism is a word only used for African conflict. So I don't like the word. So let's, what other word can we use? Ethnicism or whatever. Sorry? Discrimination is so wide. So to me, I'm talking about you don't speak the same language as I do, although we share a common culture. Now, that is something that is destroying Africans, because often our conflict had ethnic lines. Colonialism only added to it, but those ethnic lines, those fault lines, was there before. And often what happens, because you were in the trenches with somebody, those are the people you trust. So when you come into government, those are the people you appoint. So we must stop only trusting the people who speak the same language as we do, who look the way we do, who believe the things we believe. And understand is we must include a wider group of people. I made the mistake of putting gum in my mouth. And I'm owning up to it because it's bothering me. So be at peace with what your role is, whether you manage to monetize it or not. I'm actually inspired by people who are happy with what they do. I'm inspired by teachers, because I could never be a teacher. I could never be a nurse. I could never be happy with not, I had to be where I am now, because that's the only thing that would make me happy. So I'm inspired by others who are comfortable with the roles that they play. All of you, none of you look very young to me, actually. So I'm going to not call you young African leaders. I'm just going to call you leaders, if you don't mind. And I'm going to say to you is the inequality there's a financial element to it, but there's also inequality in opportunity, which is probably the worst, where you and I can have exactly the same skill, but I have access to opportunities that you don't have. So we need to provide more people with access to opportunities. And then we make our countries and our continent move forward. I think we're all tired of the typical embarrassing stories about Africa. And I'm sure you do it. It's like about my family. I've got a few relatives really who are, you can't defend their actions. And we've got family groups and we castigate them and we admit and we're not in denial about their shortcomings. But outside the family, you never criticize a family member. As a matter of fact, you pretend you don't even know the things they do. And as Africans, our continent has forced us to do that. So often, when you see African leaders pretend they don't know what's happening, they know. They just don't want to say it in your presence. So believe us, we do talk about these things to one another. We just don't want to hear it from others. But it is time that we start having honest conversations about the status of our continent, of our countries, and all the things that we do that we know we shouldn't be doing. Thank you.
Please remain standing while Your Excellency Monica Geingos exits the room. We'll now have a coffee break in Ilanga Foyer. The next panel will begin promptly at 11.